If you asked what was the most influential ship in the history of cruising, you'd probably say either the Concordia, the Monarch, or the Titanic. And well, if you say the Titanic, you're horribly wrong, because that's not even a cruise ship. The Monarch, well, I guess so. But there's one other ship that I want to talk about that kind of defined everything, and is also the reason we have large cruise ships to this day. The ship's name is the SS Norway. Now, in the 1960s, the French line's two ships, the Liberté and the Ile-de-France, were getting really old. The Ile-de-France having been made in the 1930s, and the Liberté being built around the same time as a German ocean liner, given to France as compensation for World War II. The line needed new ships, and it was already beginning to turn to cargo. The French line requested funds to the French government to build a new ship, but they were at first declined. Later, they went back up to the French government, and they accepted because they reminded the French government that this would be a symbol of national pride and more than just a ship.
Et tous ceux qu'il portera. Vous qui avez daigné bénir l'arche de Noé flottant sur les eaux du déluge, tendez-lui la main comme vous l'avez tendue à Pierre marchant sur les flots.
The French line finally had a big new ship that could rival Cunard's Queen Elizabeth II, and also had a really smart design. The ship was made in only 2 classes so that it would be easier to cruise during the off months. However, during the 1970s, ocean liners were mainly just things for people who either weren't in a rush to get to their places, or who were deathly afraid of flying. The France and her whale-tail funnels, however, were not as profitable as they thought. I mean, everyone at the time was saying to both the French line and Cunard, "You're building an ocean liner in the 1960s. What are you doing?" And they were right. The French government turned to the French line and said that they were going to cut just a little bit of funding, but advertise the ship more. Only a couple months later, the French line asked for more funding. However, the French government said no, because they wanted to fund the Concorde, which would be a better symbol of national pride. And well, it kinda was. The French line did an actually surprisingly profitable move and do cruises around the world, starting in France and going all the way around the world to places like Hong Kong and Hawaii. However, on the second ever crossing around the world, the workers heard that the government was pulling funding from the ship and demanded that the government refund the ship because they wanted their jobs back. They rioted and took over the boat and blocked the entrance to the Saint-Nazaire port for 3 days until the authorities finally came and arrested them. Their demands were never met, and the France sat vacant for 7 years. There were many people that were interested in buying the France. Even the Chinese government wanted to buy it and turn it into a casino ship. However, the main buyer was Norwegian Cruise Lines. Norwegian Cruise Lines were eager to expand their fleet of only a couple of ships. They looked at the France and realized that a big ship cruising all around non-stop in the Mediterranean would be a good choice. Everyone was crazy, telling him that during this summer they should definitely move the ship to Europe, and also that an ocean liner of that proportion could probably never actually be financially successful. However, Gloucester bought the ship. Despite the public saying that they should not hand over the pride of a nation to a foreign country, the French line sold the ship. The Norwegian Cruise Line's CEO, last name Gloucester, had looked at the ship and realized its potential. After a lengthy renovation, and one of the biggest renovations in shipping history, the ship finally entered service as the SS Norway. She sailed over to Oslo, Norway to say hello to her home country before heading over to the Mediterranean for the final inspections, checks, and bookings. At first, the ship operated in the Mediterranean and summer. However, after a couple of trips around Norway, her namesake, the owners decided to see if they could operate such a large ship in the Caribbean year-round and not move her. They did this, and it turned out very profitable, contrast to what everyone else thought at the time. In 1985, Disney had a collaboration with Norwegian Cruise Lines, and they hosted a special one-time cruise on there called Fantasy. They even had an event on there called the Norway Olympics. Anyways, with this new renovation, the back deck was flattened out and a pool was placed in the middle of the new flat deck. On the deck above would be the flat area where many events like the Fantasy and SS Norway Olympics were held. Another notable thing to mention about the SS Norway would be the two tenders that were held on the bow. These two tenders were a former World War II landing craft. Yes, I said a World War II landing craft. That's pretty awesome if you ask me. Anyways, they were two big tenders that were lowered by cranes from the ship. There's a whole video on how they work. In fact, the ramps that they used in order to get the soldiers onto the beaches were not removed, and that's how passengers got onto the beach, meaning that on almost every beach, the things could just ram into the shore and unfurl their ramp. With the cruise industry becoming increasingly more competitive, the SS Norway was refitted. This new refit gave her 2 new decks. They added balcony suites and many more things in order to increase the ratings on the ship and make it more of a destination itself. The SS Norway was now becoming ever more popular, and she was actually in a battle with Sovereign and Monarch at the time for the largest ship in the world. After her refit, she took back the title as the largest ship in the world for quite some time. There's even a video of the SS Norway departing Miami on one of its regular scheduled cruises, and then shortly after, the Queen Elizabeth II follows suit. This video is really cool because it shows the two giants in one video. These two giants, back in their ocean liner days, were competitive and were old rivals.
Federal safety officials are investigating a deadly boiler explosion aboard a cruise ship in Miami. The SS Norway had just docked yesterday when the blast sent black smoke shooting from one of its funnels. 4 workers on the ship were killed and more than a dozen injured, some with severe burns. No passengers were hurt, though.
Norwegian Cruise Line's fleet had now included some more modern ships. Therefore, they were less keen to take care of the SS Norway, as it was no longer their flagship. However, because of this, while docked in Miami, the boilers of the ship had exploded. 8 crew members died. However, no passengers were on board, as it was done during turnaround time. The plan was to tow the ship to Bremerhaven, Germany for repairs, and NCL was now realizing what had gone wrong. However, when it made it to Bremerhaven, it had told the public that the SS Norway would never be sailing again. This meant the end for one of the world's most iconic cruise ships. 3 months after the ship arrived in Bremerhaven, she appeared with the name Blue Lady and the Norwegian Cruise Line's logos being taken off of the ship. It appeared as though she had been sold to another company. She was registered in Monrovia, Liberia, and according to shiptracker.com, she stopped in Liberia to refuel before continuing on to Alang, India. Everyone knew what was happening to the ship now. However, because of the large amount of asbestos inside the ship, she was denied entrance into India and docked in the Malacca Strait so that they could take off all the asbestos and sail her back to India. After sitting there for a further 3 months, she made her way to Alang, India, where she was finally beached. During scrapping, the top 2 decks were taken off, which briefly returned her to her pre-1990 state. After this, the rest of the ship rapidly disappeared, and in May 2009, the ship was gone. The SS Norway's competitor Sovereign sailed until 2020 when she and her sister the Monarch were scrapped. However, the SS Norway proved that you can keep a ship in one area of the world for its entire working career and still make a profit, and it also shows that size equals more money, as long as you have enough cabins. This actually meant now that cruise lines could start building bigger ships, which is how we build all these big ships today and still make profits. Here's what maritime historian Bill Miller had to say about the SS Norway.
The SS Norway was a pioneer ship which I did several cruises, and I crossed to Europe in it as the France when it had this incredible image. It was she was like the Normandy, the greatest of liners reincarnate in the 60s and 70s. But to go back aboard her as the Norway, she was saved in 1979-80, and she was the first mega cruise ship, so she was innovative. And she also proved not only that large 2,200 bed cruise ships had a future. Remember, we didn't have 70,000-ton cruise ships in those days. She proved that a big liner could operate year-round, that people would want to go to the Caribbean, say, and leave the hot humidity of the Northeast and go to the hot humidity of the Virgin Islands in July. She proved that you could run a 7-day cruise year-round. And she was the innovator, she today, in retrospect, would be the great queen mother of cruise ships, the godmother of what we have today. She showed that big liners had a future, they had a role, that number of people could be accommodated. She also showed that infrastructure had to be organized purposely, like having large tenders so everyone could get ashore in an hour and not in 4 or 5 hours. She introduced shopping arcades and leisurely dining and a multiplicity of events on board. She was outstanding in so many ways, and I am sad that she's gone, but I want to say that she's left such a great legacy. She had a great life. She sailed for 45 years. Not bad for a great liner.
Honestly, my favorite version of the SS Norway is its post-1990 refit because I think it looked more modern. And well, these days, the only reason I'm getting into modern cruise ships is because I miss going on holidays. Anyways, if anyone actually liked the Blue Lady look more than any of the other ones, well then I would be a little surprised considering the logo is gone and the inside of the ship was extremely run down, but hey, the name was cool. Anyways, a Q&A will be coming out for this documentary soon, and for my previous documentary, which will be linked in the description. I will be going into some stuff that I did not go into in this video, and also covering things I didn't have time for. I think it should be remembered because it revolutionized cruising and brought a whole new generation of cruise ships to the table, especially because she proved that you could have a ship with huge proportions in one place for the entire season and still make a ton of money, as I've already stated before. Anyways, thanks for all watching this documentary. Leave your questions down below, and thanks for watching.